This is William and Lonsdale, a podcast about the legal ecosystem and the fascinating people who make it tick. Today, your host Michael Green speaks with the wonderful Fleur Katsmartin, Chief Legal Officer and Corporate Secretary at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Throughout her law degree, articles and early legal roles, Fleur never felt like she was in the right place. In her words, it always seemed like she was, well, too much. But Fleur found her legal sweet spot working in-house. As she puts it, she much prefers working with people than lawyers. As her career progressed, Fleur also came to understand that working in a purpose-driven organisation is crucial for her. In her current role, Fleur leads a team of purpose-driven lawyers at one of Australia's largest public hospitals. But as she has come to learn for both herself and her team, on the flip side of that passion and dedication can be burnout. And it's important to find the balance.
We're a public hospital operating 24/7. You could literally work 24/7 if you wanted to. So how do we kind of pull that dial back so that you're still able to work and manage the volume of work without getting to a level of stress or burnout? I'm very cognizant of the amount of work and we reflect that other workers in the hospital, like nurses, for example, are on shift work. So they will finish their shift and then someone comes in and takes over and continues to work with a patient. We don't check out and have someone else come and do our work. It's always there. And so I'm very cognizant of trying to recognise that in my team of overachievers, because it's always harder to kind of repair once you've gotten over that hump than before it.
Our guest this morning in Lives in the Law is Fleur Katsmartin. Fleur is the in-house counsel for Royal Melbourne Hospital, not a place that we normally would associate with the law, and so it'll be interesting to find out how Fleur's journey got her to this position at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. But as usual, we'll start at the beginning. And it's a very interesting beginning because Fleur's parents came from the old USSR, Russia and all of those other countries which Russia invaded, I guess, and made a part of the United Soviet Socialist Republic.
Very good.
And your mum and dad were originally in Belarus and then Latvia.
Yes.
So, Fleur, can you tell us about that? I mean, they were pretty dark days back then in the USSR.
They were. Look, I think post-World War II, it was a very difficult time, I think, in the USSR, So mum and dad were both born just after World War II. They met and were both born in Bobruisk, which is a small town in Belarus, and married and had my sister in Latvia, in Riga. They moved to Riga. And I think post-World War II, there was a lot of anti-Semitism that came out, a lot of resentment from the Russians in terms of the, casualties of war. There was a lot of lives lost across the board. But I think, my parents didn't often speak much about it when I was growing up. And I feel like as I've gotten older, they've let us know more about what it was like. Growing up in communist times, there wasn't really a concept of religion or what that was, except post-World War II, because Jews out of Russia were allowed to go to Israel, the newly established state at that point. Your identification documents would identify you as being Jewish or not. So what that meant, I know from Dad's experience, he had issues going to certain universities because at that point they weren't accepting Jews. They had troubles trying to purchase a car in town. So there was a lot of things that they couldn't really understand why, because they were never religious growing up in the time of communism. So that made for a really tough time. And so they were quite young when they married. And so by the end of their early 20s, when my sister was quite young, Dad had said to Mum, we need to go. There has to be more to life than this. This can't be as good as it gets, which is so courageous. I can't really imagine what that would have been like. And then they decided they would come to Australia.
And were they able to leave the USSR freely?
No, it was very difficult. So, even the things like back then, you needed to get permission from your parents, sign documentation that they were letting you leave, even as adults. And so my dad's father was a staunch communist and couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave. And that caused a lot of problems. And, I remember Dad telling me that, he forged his dad's signature on documentation. And so they left as refugees, and there were a number of programs being run at that point to get certain people out of the USSR. So they went via Italy for a few months with my sister at that point, who was 4, with a bunch of other Russian Jews who were leaving, and then made their way to Australia and got here in December of 79.
And both of them were chemical engineers, I think, in the USSR.
Yes. So they were both qualified and working as chemical engineers, but on return, or on arrival, I should say, to Australia, early 80s, qualifications weren't considered reciprocal, obviously from the USSR.
Yeah.
And so they were starting from zero. So, they both worked in factories. Mum was a beautician at some point. Dad was a masseuse as well. And then ultimately Dad became a taxi driver and drove taxis for the rest of his life while he was working.
And that was his own business. Your dad started his own business, buying a taxi licence and...
Oh, so he didn't buy a licence originally, and then there was a program that the government run, because licences became so expensive in the taxi industry. The government rolled out a program, would have been early 2000s, the green top cabs, you might remember, which was the opportunity to get people who couldn't afford these expensive licenses to actually be able to run their own business. And so he was one of the first 20 in that program when the government launched it, but always worked so hard, as did Mum. Like, I was very aware, even at an early age, the sacrifices they made, to come here, in the belief that there had to be something better. And, even, at a time in the 80s, no internet, obviously, not even telephones. I remember getting telegrams from my grandmother every now and then when they could. They left their family thinking they'd never see them again to go to the opposite side of the world, which, I can't really imagine doing myself.
No, very courageous people, very, very courageous people, the people who did that, and particularly leaving the USSR, which was a frightening sort of a place and not easy to get out of. But anyway, here in Australia, their pride and joy of their life, their baby daughter is born.
Yes, yeah. So I was born a few years after they arrived here, first generation, and off we went.
And this is just by the by, just out of my own personal interest. Did your mum and dad speak Russian at home?
They did. So Mum learnt English, or quite a bit of English, still in the USSR, which is interesting at the time, given what the time was like. But coming out here, we spoke Russian at home. I never learnt how to write it or read it, which now in hindsight's a shame. But we spoke Russian at home. Dad still has quite a thick Russian accent. I think Mum doesn't really. And now my sister and I, we speak a lot of broken Russian. Yeah. And other family members, would often laugh that we speak Russian with such a strong Aussie accent.
Fleur, as a lifetime Australian, I almost feel embarrassed. In fact, I am embarrassed to ask this question. But how are your parents now, having come from that USSR background? We've got to a stage here in Australia where there have been firebombing of synagogues. How do people like your parents, how do your parents with their background cope with this? What do they think of it?
Yeah, look, Michael, it's a really good question, but it's a terrible one. I think I reflect a lot about it because, we've got a situation where it's almost 50 years since my parents came out here from the USSR, where they literally escaped in the belief there had to be something better and that they couldn't understand the injustice of what was happening. And it's wild to think we're coming full circle and they're living a few kilometres down the road where they're seeing things that they never thought they'd have to see or experience again in their lifetimes. So it's a pretty dark time. I think that's an understatement. I am very aware of the impact it's having on them and, that their own fear they have for us as their children and their grandchildren as to some of the uncertainty that the future holds with this, because there are things here that I never thought I'd experience or see in my lifetime either.
No one's got an answer, but except, as I say, in my view, it's shameful. Mm. We better get on to schooling, I guess. You're born here, educated here, obviously. So take us back to then. Where did you go to school? What sort of a schooling did you receive? I mean, I'm assuming most migrants, be they Italian migrants, Vietnamese migrants, Russian, Jewish migrants, education is really the core of what they want for their children.
Yes, and the opportunity. So, I think I was pretty studious from an early age. So primary school was down in Bentley East, originally a school called Moorabbin Heights, which was then closed, and then Coatesville Primary. And then I attended Caulfield Grammar School because I was awarded a scholarship, which was lucky because, to be honest, we wouldn't have been able to afford it. And that opened a lot of doors. But I think it also started my journey of being in places where I didn't really feel like I was part of that crew or that I necessarily was one of the others. But no, they were always very encouraging of education because not too dissimilar to what they would have grown up with, that it opens those doors, that is the opportunity for you to be able to go and do whatever you want to.
I found it interesting that when in Year 9 at Caulfield Grammar, you had a chance to go to China.
Yes.
And you were there for, 5 weeks doing an exchange program?
Yeah, so this was in 1998, Caulfield Grammar set up a campus in Nanjing, which was, the first time in Australia this had really happened, to set up a standalone campus, which was, incredible at the time. And so students in Year 9 would go over there for a full immersive experience for 5 weeks, which was amazing. This idea that you'd have, 40, 45 students away from family, basically living in a dorm accommodation and really, immersing yourself into culture, lessons and being away from your family. So it was amazing opportunity. And, Nanjing, I think, was a really excellent campus while it was operational.
We'll keep moving on. You went to Monash University and did law.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
That's a good question, Michael. I still ask myself that now. My current role. Look, I was never really sure of what I was going to do, to be honest. I did legal studies in Year 12 and didn't enjoy it. I wasn't passionate about the Constitution and the legal system, and I thought it was all a bit dry. And I remember, sitting with Mum not long before the exam started and going through what was then a really thick book of all the possible courses and kind of circling things that I had an interest in. And law was always, there, but I wasn't convinced. And I honestly didn't think I was going to get the marks either. But lo and behold, I was able to get into arts law at Monash. And in my arts side of things, I did sociology and behavioural studies because I was always really interested in the psychology side of things, but without having to do statistics. But the law, again, I found myself in a position where very early on, I didn't feel like I was part of that group. I still remember very, very early on, probably one of the first few weeks after a crim law lecture, being in crisis really and being like, what am I doing here? This isn't for me. I don't know if this feels right. And my best friend from law school, who I'm still best friends with, he basically talked me off the ledge and said, let's just roll with it. See how you go. You might end up enjoying it. You might not. But, this is all just figuring out what's next for you, which was really amazing advice. And off we went.
When did it turn around? When did it become something that you enjoyed and something you could see yourself making a career out of?
Probably. So in fourth year, I went to Prato, which is the campus that Monash has on the outskirts of Florence. It's about an hour out, which really changed things for me. Part of it was the subjects. So, we're doing international commercial arbitration and trial practice and advocacy with the Honourable George Hampel in Italy, which was just amazing. But also, being overseas at the time as a young student kind of opened my mind to the concept that I don't necessarily have to fit in, but I can enjoy myself and enjoy aspects of the law that I probably didn't realise I could as well. The other thing was that, it changed how I studied because we would do, instead of a 12-week semester, you would do 12 days in a row and do 3 hours a day. So you were just knocking off those subjects, which probably then meant I didn't study as much as I should have in my last year because I was like, I can game the system here. But it was really eye-opening to see how this could be different.
You must have done pretty well with your studies because you got clerkships with 2 of the large commercial firms, Coors and Allens. What was that experience like? Did you enjoy seeing how these big firms operate and could you see yourself a part of them?
So I enjoyed the clerkship experience. I made a lot of really great friends who I'm still friends with now. The reoccurring theme, I knew I didn't really fit in to what I expected at those large law firms. But at that point, I probably didn't see it as much of an issue. That came later. I wasn't really certain that I wanted to do that or go into private practice. But I think, and I've spoken with others about this, there's this real push that, you go into law school, you want to do clerkships and you want to end up at a big firm. Like that's kind of the trajectory when really there are so many other pathways and so much else you could do with the skills that you learn. And I think only now there's more of that information. Like back then there really wasn't as much information as I would have liked about the other pathways. But look, it brought me to where I am.
But you didn't get articles at either of those firms.
No.
Why, was there a reason why?
Yeah, well, look, I contacted the partner that I was reporting to. I won't mention which one of the firms so I don't get myself into trouble, because having gone through the clerkship process and having a great time, I couldn't really understand what the issues were. And so, I didn't get articles, and then I didn't get articles at any law firms. And so I'd called one of the partners to get some constructive feedback. And she had said to me, there were no issues from a capability perspective, but, she thought I didn't really fit the mould. And I've said this openly previously that, she said that I laughed too loud and my hair was too big and I just wasn't the fit that they wanted in a law firm, which for someone, who never really felt like I fit in these circles, it was pretty devastating, because it's one thing for you to feel it. It's another for someone very high up in the profession to tell you. And so I was really devastated for a while, because it's very personal. So yeah, that was tough.
Do you remember how you picked yourself up from the devastation? Because it is, and it's a bit of a recurring theme. And I think resilience is a recurring theme too, because you didn't let this sort of thing stop you. But did you analyse it and think about it and then decide, oh, damn this, I'm going to go on regardless?
Yeah, a little bit. I thought part of it was that I thought I'd have to play the game more. Like, my marks were great, and I'd had experience, whatever else. But then I thought to myself, in going for other roles, I needed to be less of who I was, which now it cuts both ways. In hindsight, it makes me sad, because now, as you see, Michael, I'm so myself, you can't avoid it. But, there was that real period where I felt like I couldn't be myself. And for a young, impressionable, 20-something-year-old, that's really hard. And I know a lot of people go through that. It's interesting that it wasn't enough to turn me off and go do something completely different, like, become a superstar or a dancer or something. So but instead, I was going for job interviews, and I'm sure we'll talk about AGS in a minute, but was wearing a plain black suit and would slick my hair back and was trying to practice speaking quietly when I answered questions so that I wouldn't come across as being too much.
I was going to say there, thank you, Mum and Dad, that you had the courage and resilience to be yourself. Now, you mentioned the AGS. Is that where you did your articles?
Yes, moved to Canberra and did the graduate program up there, which was a 15-month program, 5 rotations. There was a rotation through the commercial area, litigation, the Office for General Counsel, which does a lot of the constitutional type of work, and then 2 outposts, one to the then Customs and Border Security Department, and then the other one was FAXIA, which at the time was Family Affairs, Indigenous Affairs and Community Housing. Which was probably the first time that I'd been in-house, and at that point I'd started to see, that was probably something more that I wanted to explore. I often say to people, I like working with people more than I enjoy working with lawyers. That was probably my first insight into that.
So with these rotations at the AGS, part of the time you're in the AGS office in Canberra,
yes,
but part of the time you went out to the Department of this or the Department of Health or whatever it might be.
That's right, and you do like a 3-month stint at the department, as part of their in-house legal team.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoyed, because it just meant you had a much broader understanding of the client, exposure to policy, and just thinking more outside the box than, I guess, your traditional providing legal advice or deliverables to a client. More immersive.
Fleur, you have maybe 15 months, 18 months in Canberra with the AGS, and you come back to Melbourne.
Yes.
What brought you back to Melbourne? Did you stay with the AGS, with a job with them when you finished the rotation?
Yes, so I'd finished the graduate program and moved into the commercial area at AGS in Canberra, and the decision at that point was whether I was going to go into commercial or litigation. And as I often say, I really love the start of a relationship where you want to, make a deal and sort something, as opposed to the end of the relationship where you're in court and trying to fight things against each other. So I went into the commercial team and started working there, and Mum was sick with breast cancer. And so the AGS were so accommodating. I really, was very grateful for them that they were able to make space for me in the Melbourne office so I could come back and work here so I could be with Mum.
And I think you said your mum, just to round that off, your mum is well now.
Yes, she is well.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
After the AGS, although not attracted to working in big firms, you work with Lander and Rogers, who are a pretty big firm.
Yes. Look, I reached a point at AGS where I was concerned, given that they were the law firm, servicing government, that I would be pigeonholed as a government lawyer forever. I'd been there a number of years, so I had at that point decided I'd like to go in-house, but then thought, it would be good to get some experience in private practice to build my skill set, bag of tricks, before then trying to find an in-house role. And so I had a friend who had left AGS and gone to Landers who'd set up a meeting for me, one of the partners there, and we started those wheels turning. And so a position became available for me in the corporate team at Landers.
It sounds to me, Fleur, as though you, despite some setbacks and hiccups, you've been pretty strategic. You thought about, I'd like to go in-house and therefore I'll get some experience with a firm before I go in-house.
Yeah, look, I think that's very kind. Thank you. I don't know if at the time it felt so strategic. I think, and I know the world has changed a lot now. There are junior lawyers who come straight out of school and are able to go directly into in-house roles. But back then it was much harder. And AGS, I think the awareness of them in-house was limited. So I would have to then explain, well, I worked in government, but I'm not just a government lawyer and I have commercial skills or whatever else. So I had thought, having some private practice experience would help me then be able to go into that next step.
What sort of work did you do with Landers?
The time at Landers was pretty limited because, it's funny what you wish for. So within the first 6 to 8 weeks, I was then seconded out to a client. So I went up to Sydney and was seconded to an organisation called Healthdirect Australia and was on secondment there for roughly 9 months before ultimately joining Healthdirect.
So you're on secondment in-house with Healthdirect?
Yes.
As a Landers employee,
yes.
But after 9 months, did they offer you a job?
Yes.
So you'd got to know them and they'd got to know you and they thought you'd be a good fit for them.
Yes.
And so they offer you a job.
Yes.
So you better tell us who Healthdirect are. What do they do?
So Healthdirect is the National Virtual Public Health Information Service. They're an organisation which is jointly owned by the federal and state governments that was
originally
created to help people access information and advice regarding their own health as and when they need it.
Access it online?
Access online, access via contact centres. So they operate the Healthdirect helpline, which is a 24/7 nurse-staffed line where you can call and speak to a nurse and be triaged to determine what's going on. They have a bunch of tech properties like a symptom checker online, which will help you diagnose, triage what your symptoms are to determine do you need to go to the doctor or should you go to emergency. And also lots of other information online with really the intention to reduce driving of patients to ED when you don't necessarily need to go across the country, but as well as providing people with information which is Australian and relevant so that we were generating content. So if you Google, for example, asthma, the first hit you will get now is a Healthdirect page put together in the Australian context by Australian clinicians, so you're not relying on WebMD or a US resource or things like that instead.
In that context, what does a lawyer do? Or what did this lawyer do?
Well, there was an exciting time when I first joined, even on secondment. They were in a growth phase. They had just started work on delivering the My Aged Care contact centre that they were running for government. So you have all these tech properties and bleeding edge technology that we're trying to implement at a large scale with the overlay of health information with that. You're providing advice and guidance in terms of how we best protect the organisation from risks when we're delivering things en masse, which are not intended to be diagnostic tools, but that are, ensuring that it's sound advice and that people can rely on.
Because it does sound to me as though you would be treading a fine line where if some wrong advice or bad advice is given, you're on the end of a tort suit.
That's right.
For damages.
Yes.
Has that happened to Healthdirect?
I don't know if I'm at liberty to disclose that, but I would say that, there are medico-legal issues to consider.
It's obviously a risk.
Yes.
It's got to be a risk in a situation. So you've got call centres.
Yes.
All here in Australia? I mean, when we think call centres, we think of often, in the Philippines or somewhere.
No, part of the mandate from the governments was that this had to be Australian-based and the technology and the location. So often you'd outsource to providers like your Medibanks or like Bolton Clark. So health organisations that already have potentially contact centres of their own, servicing the public, that would then deliver a stream of service for us.
You called yourself a Jane of all trades and the master of none.
Yes.
What did that mean?
Oh, look, I think that's really, when I think of what an in-house lawyer is, or you kind of know a little bit of everything, but not really a lot about anything. And I think my time in Healthdirect definitely highlighted that. You know, when I first started, I didn't know what an API was. I didn't know what the cloud was. I'd had very little experience in tech. And so, you know, there were some exceptional technology people at Healthdirect who would spend the time to explain these concepts to me so that I could then start thinking from a risk perspective, you know, what are we trying to protect, or how do we protect this, or how do we enable them to get to where they need to in what they're delivering. But I was definitely not an expert in that space. And so you'd be doing that in one instance. And then to your point, Michael, there could be some medico-legal matter, which again, I was not an expert in. And then, you know, general business or commercial. So you end up getting involved in every aspect of the business with this kind of can-do mentality where you try your hand at everything to help people get to where they need to.
Was there much outsourcing? Did you use private firms?
We did. That came more later with some of the other big projects we did. But at the time, there was, as I started as senior lawyer there, and it ultimately was GC at Healthdirect. We had a team of
GC being General Counsel.
General Counsel. There were 3 of us in the team, so very small. So there was a lot of work, including, you know, the negotiation with all the governments for the ongoing funding arrangements for the organisation.
So you say a team of 3, and I think in your time there, COVID arrived.
Yes.
How did a team of 3 deliver the service needed to help Healthdirect protect itself and mitigate its risks, et cetera, in a time of COVID?
Yeah, well, look, COVID presented perhaps one of the greatest opportunities for Healthdirect in that the government tasked us, the federal government at the time tasked us with establishing a call centre within 7 days that would be staffed by doctors and nurses.
7 days?
Within 7 days.
That's
to be able to deliver.
Surely.
The challenge, Michael, was that we didn't know what was coming. So at the time we had contact centres, call centres where people were sitting on site, on premise, delivering services. And very quickly with COVID, you couldn't have that. You had to have people working from home because if one person tested in that contact centre, everyone would have to be locked down. So the service would go down. So we had to change the model of how we were operating to ultimately build infrastructure and staff the model in a way that made it, and they're still operating it now, I'm aware, that the largest health call centre in Australia. And at its peak, you know, the National Coronavirus Helpline was taking 30,000 calls a day because it was the one source of truth. The government, rightly so, wanted there to be a one source of truth that people could call and rely on where they could disseminate all the information, and Healthdirect was running it.
When you say a call centre, am I imagining a big building in the middle of Melbourne or Sydney with thousands of people in there answering phone calls, or are there people scattered across the whole of Australia working from their homes?
Well, it was originally the former and then it moved to the latter. So, you know, you would have had people sitting on premise, hundreds of people in a space, delivering service, but as COVID rolled on and that you couldn't have this because of the contact tracing and the concerns of people getting sick, the whole model of how we delivered these services had to change. So you would then have a completely decentralised model where everyone was delivering those services from home.
And you're able to manage that, or the appropriate people are able to manage it? Seems to me to be a very difficult thing.
It was a really challenging time, very exciting but scary because as you'd all remember, you know, the beginning of COVID in 2020, no one really knew what was coming. You know, buildings were being locked down, people didn't know where they could go, what they could do, or what was going to happen. And we were, all systems go, working round the clock to make sure we could put out these deliverables that the government had wanted for the sake of the Australian public. Yeah. So there was a really big responsibility with that. And the team that I worked with at the time were exceptional. And back to your point, you know, we were outsourcing. Like I was using 2 different law firms at the time because there weren't enough lawyers to be churning the amount of agreements and arrangements that we needed to put in place in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the staffing, BCPs, emergency strategy, you name it. Like that,
what are BCPs?
Sorry, business continuity plans to address the change in business model because of COVID. So there was, I took in a lot of acronyms working at the hospital. There was a lot of work that our team could never have managed, and not even another team at one law firm. We had to engage broadly.
It seems to me remarkable that you did.
Yes.
I mean, I guess if someone before had told you that this is what you're going to confront, you'd say, well, that's impossible. Find someone else.
Yes.
But you had to.
Yes.
And you did it on the fly, so to speak.
Yes. And we did. And the team, as I said, the team in Healthdirect and the executive at the time were amazing, that we really, everyone, had a very clear vision as to where we needed to get to in unbelievable timeframes, because everything was changing on a daily basis. And we just didn't know what we didn't know. Even as I said before, this idea that you would have to pivot from having contact centres with hundreds of people in it to the next day, how do we make sure everyone has the systems they need at home and the telephony systems to be able to answer calls from the public? Like these small things that you'd never thought of before. Very, very rewarding time, but also, I look back on that time and it feels a little bit unreal, to be honest.
You seem to have a bit of a break because you decided to have your first child during this.
Yeah, so
and become the General Counsel for Healthdirect.
Yeah, so that happened just before COVID hit. So I'd had my first child, Luca, and had come back to work with pretty decent imposter syndrome, and then was put into, or the opportunity for the GC position came up, which I really wasn't prepared for. And then a month later, this all happened with COVID. So the only blessing was that I didn't have time to feed my imposter syndrome, because we were working at such a pace. You don't really have time to think about it. You just do.
And it's only in hindsight that you are aware that you were suffering from imposter syndrome.
Yes. Yeah.
Lives in the Law is proudly sponsored by City Maps Illustrated. Their recent publication, The Melbourne Map, is a celebration of our wonderful city. This stunning, hand-drawn illustration, which took more than 3 years to create, is available as an art print, jigsaw puzzle and calendar. The perfect acquisition for your home, office or corporate gifting.
Without knowing too much of your story, Fleur, it would seem almost obvious that you were running the risk of suffering from burnout. You and the rest of your team, everybody I assume, you've used the phrase it was like the Wild West. Did you suffer from burnout? Did you run the risk of suffering from burnout? And if you did, how did you cope?
Yeah, a good question, Michael. And I talk a lot with my current team about burnout. So I do think, at least from my own experience, I didn't know it until it was too late. So, where I've come back to work, got a 11, 12-month-old at home, COVID has hit, we're now locked down, you can't travel, you can't see family, and I'm working these hours, which is, it was so professionally fulfilling, one of the most amazing experiences from a professional perspective. But, COVID didn't stop. So it's not like we set up this call centre or we started delivering these services and that was it. I mean, we could all have a break and go on a holiday and go back to normal. We were in this zone for an extended period of time, and I didn't really appreciate the impact it was having on me, probably until I fell pregnant with baby number 2 towards the end of 2020. And at that point, I was becoming very aware that there was the physical fatigue, which was there, but also, self-doubt, not being able to really, I guess, commit or engage as much as I wanted to, and just not really appreciating what was going on. But it was ultimately me operating at such a high level that things were failing and I was missing out on time with my family. And while the job was so rewarding and amazing, it's not everything. And I didn't really get that until, as I said, being pregnant with number 2, things started to slow down. And I was like, there's some damage here, which I've managed to do because I hadn't recognised any of the signals because I was just all systems go.
And so what did you do?
So I'd made the decision with my husband at that point with baby number 2 that we would move back to Melbourne because I wanted to come home. I wanted to see my immediate family.
You were in Sydney?
Sorry, I was in Sydney, yes. Yeah, so I'd been in Sydney for almost 10 years at this point, and my husband's from Sydney, but he was very supportive that I needed more support around me. And with baby number 2 coming, at that point, I'd made the decision that I would be leaving Healthdirect and I wanted to find another role to really, I guess, reset and think, how can I better invest in myself without letting myself get to that point?
So the other role turns out to be in-house counsel at Royal Melbourne Hospital, a small role. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I was always really interested in public health. It's funny, Michael, because I could never have appreciated, if I thought the role at Healthdirect was big and intense, what the role at RMH would be like. But I was very interested in public health and applied for the job and had made the first round interview and then had should have flown down to have a second round interview with the CEO as a coffee chat, but because of COVID, we were locked out and not able to come down. And then was really surprised again that I'd ultimately got the role, but then we couldn't get out of Sydney because it was an extreme red zone. So we were locked away. So I started work remotely, actually, which was very progressive of the hospital at that point, to have their new GC start somewhere in a different state for a few months until we could actually come down to Melbourne and relocate.
The CEO of Royal Melbourne said that the position of being in-house counsel was a renovator's dream.
Yes. The then CEO, and I am still good friends with her, I speak with her about it quite often and joke a bit. I probably, again, didn't really understand what that meant, but was so excited by the opportunity. I was like, this sounds amazing. But no, I think there'd been a time where legal services had decentralised at RMH, and there perhaps wasn't such a focus on legal services being how I like to see it as a trusted partner, trusted advisor, someone who's at the table and who can enable the business to do what it needs to. Those aspects weren't there. And when I first started, I was the first lawyer in the team again. So
they never had in-house counsel before.
Well, they did, but there was a period where there wasn't anyone in the seat, which for a workforce of 11,000 over a number of sites, that was part of the renovator's journey I went on in trying to determine, what do we do now? How do I start in building this house, which had perhaps fallen apart?
When you say building this house, I mean, looking at from afar and looking at the information you've given us, it seems a huge job where you cover things such as medical claims, there's a charitable foundation, there are obviously governance issues, procurement of all of the things that need to be procured. There's obviously technical issues, huge technical issues in a hospital, research. How do you cover all those things? I mean, and you started from scratch effectively?
Yeah. So part of this was trying to determine what are the key risk areas from the executive perspective where they could most benefit from legal input and involvement. So some of the areas you named, in my mind, the clear, obvious ones. I should say that, public health, generally legal resourcing is pretty tough and pretty tight for internal resourcing. And I was very fortunate to have the support of the executive and the board to build the team to be able to address those key areas, at least in the first instance. I will honestly say there are still things I kick over at the hospital where I haven't seen or been involved in before, where I'm like, well, now this could definitely benefit from a risk perspective in having legal involvement. And that still happens. And it's not surprising in an organisation that large. But as I've built up the team, and August will be 4 years, which doesn't feel like it's been 4 years, we have really worked on building a team which can service all areas of the organisation, but mainly those where, those critical risks lie that need that legal support.
How big's your team?
So we have 7. Which I should say one of the largest out of all the health services in Victoria, which, given how many large health services there are, it's pretty amazing to do so. But, the team is a group of these amazing, exceptionally intelligent, purpose-driven people who come to work each day wanting to make a difference and wanting to connect. And we deliver legal services with kindness. That's our big thing. It's one of the key values of RMH. And I love that because it's probably the first time I'd really thought of that. But we do. Legal services are delivered with kindness. And it makes a difference.
Certainly does. Listening to what you've said, Fleur, it seems to me both with Healthdirect and with Royal Melbourne, risk mitigation is really the core of what you do, trying to identify the risks, potential risks for the organisation, and then how do we deal with those or mitigate them.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Risk is, and it's really the yardstick of us knowing, how far we can push or what we can do. And I do really like to see us as collaborators and enablers. We enable people often think of legal as being a blocker from being able to do what we want to because of the parameters of the law. Whereas I really feel like we enable the business to be able to do what they need to by helping them get to where they need to. And we also work really hard to connect areas. I think that's one of the great things about being in-house legal, where you have a view of an organisation and all the different parts in a way that other areas may not. So, often we will speak about matters and be able to pull things together that they may not have thought of or connect them with other areas of the organisation that should be well and truly aware of what's going on as well.
William and Lonsdale is brought to you by Green's List, one of the leading multidisciplinary barristers lists in Australia. Green's List believe in promoting conversation around the ideas and issues that shape not only our legal system, but our wider community.
You say you've got a team of 7 people, not just say, you have got a team of 7 people, Fleur. which seems to me to be minuscule in an organisation of 12,000 people with covering such a huge spectrum. And you've said that people who work in this situation, lawyers, need to be able to live in discomfort.
Yes.
Why? What is living in discomfort, and why do we need that skill?
Yeah, look, I think it comes from something you mentioned earlier, Michael, about how you can be across everything in the organisation. The shorter answer is that you can't. You cannot have a handle of absolutely everything. And given how quickly things move, or not just the rate of speed, but the priorities and whatever else, there is a I guess a benchmark of, I will do what I can and what I need to do, but is that potentially, and all within the parameters of the law, I should say, but is that the gold star standard, or is that how I would have expected things when I was working in private practice? Or would that be a 10-page advice, or, those sorts of things? No, because you don't have the time. You're in a position where there is a lot of churn and burn, but you're also thinking on the fly and thinking of things. Can we get to where we need to? Am I comfortable enough? And that's a challenge, and a challenge for some of the more junior members of the team who may have come out of private practice or whatever else, where you learn that you back yourself, but you're also aware that there's, you yourself are operating at a level of risk which you may not have done so in other workplaces, because you're just sometimes flying by the seat of your pants to get things done. That makes me sound like a really, really average lawyer, but I don't think it's that unusual, to be honest, in terms of these in-house roles in big organisations, which you don't have the resources. I'm not really aware of many teams that are so resource heavy that they can really provide gold star standard deliverables non-stop to their organisation. It's not possible.
And therefore, is it a particular type of person who is attracted to work in this environment?
I think so. And I think it's a balance between being able to get to a point where you can live in being discomfort, and not letting that get to you too much, and also that purpose. The people that come to work today, they believe in what they're doing and they believe in the impact they're having. We often do tours of the hospital so that the members of my team that do a lot of procurement work can actually see the outputs of what they've done, procuring these huge pieces of equipment which are saving lives, where you wouldn't necessarily think that when you're negotiating a contract. But this all comes down to the bigger picture, the purpose that we're trying to achieve together. So I think the combination of both, and it's not for everyone. I'm aware there are people that are in-house and then decide to go back into private practice because there is something very appealing about the structure and being resourced very well, and even the timekeeping to an extent. And there are challenges, obviously, that come in that environment, but this isn't for everyone, and I know that.
And would I be right in thinking that you've got to be a person who is not driven by the desire to make a lot of money?
Yes.
To put it bluntly. You've got to be motivated by something else.
Yes, definitely. But with that comes challenges too. As I said, I have this exceptional team of lawyers who I'm so in awe of being able to work with every day, but they're not motivated by money. So getting them to not burn out themselves because they're always committed and willing to work as hard as they can is also a challenge, because you could, we're a public hospital operating 24/7. You could literally work 24/7 if you wanted to. So how do we kind of pull that dial back so that you're still able to work and manage the volume of work without getting to a level of stress or burnout? And we talk about that a lot. In fact, it was great to hear Carly being interviewed by you recently. We had Carly and Sally from Human Ethos come and do some work with my team, because I'm very cognizant of the amount of work, and we reflect that other workers in the hospital, like nurses, for example, are on shift work. So they will finish their shift and then someone comes in and takes over and continues to work with a patient. We don't check out and have someone else come and do our work. It's always there. And so some of the things that the team is exposed to in terms of vicarious trauma, it's difficult to manage and handle. So it's always, I'm very aware of that, how best I can support my team. And even given my own journey, Michael, and the elements of burnout, where I'm very cognizant of trying to recognise that in my team of overachievers, because it's always harder to kind of repair once you've gotten over that hump than before it.
It amazes me still to think that only 7 people are doing all that work, Fleur. Do people specialise within the multitude of areas that a public hospital has for lawyers to work in? Do you have a specialist in tech, a specialist in research, medical claims or whatever?
Yeah, so we have a couple of specialists and then a couple of generalists. And then, myself who does like a little bit of everything. So we have a medico-legal lawyer. We have a lawyer who specialises in research and IP. We have construction and property lawyer, and then some, procurement, commercial, regulatory advisory lawyers who can do anything really, with their level of expertise. And then a procurement, contracting, commercial lawyer as well. So when I first started, my view was, we should all be generalists and be able to do anything. But the more you work in it, and it comes back to what I was saying earlier, Michael, about the real risk areas of the organisation, you need some specialist skills to do that. Having said that, we talk a lot about in the team about ensuring that anyone can pick anything up. I'm not a medico-legal guru, but definitely if my star is on leave, I should be able to do that work, and I need to be able to do that work. So it's ensuring how do we keep our fingers, on the pulse across the whole board.
Do you have people, friends in the profession, possibly barristers, possibly solicitors, who can pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got an issue with something. Can you do this work? Can you tell me really,
Yeah, well, it's twofold. So we have a really excellent public health service lawyer network across the state that the General Counsels across all the hospitals meet monthly because we all go through the same sorts of issues and have the same sorts of nightmares and, share in the pain. And then, yes, I'm always phoning a friend because I think, part of that is why would I reinvent the wheel when I can just ask the question?
And you have, when I asked that question, I was thinking of myself many years ago in a small firm or a sole practitioner. It couldn't have existed without being able to pick up the phone and ask friends questions.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're the same because it is really a very small team for a huge organisation.
And there's a lot of specialists, even the regulatory stuff, you name it. There'll be something really specialised that I could spend the time trying to determine the answer, or I could ask for an opinion initially or speak to someone else that I know would have had a view on this to kind of help guide me, because I don't need to solve every problem myself, but I need to solve the problems.
Yep. Looking ahead, Fleur, 10 years' time, got any thoughts where you might be?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, Michael. I've had a few people ask me that of late. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd like to think I'll still be in some sort of purpose-driven organisation. That's really my sweet spot. And I really love health. I think there's so much that we can do to help others, and that really drives me. Whether it's as a lawyer or not, I don't know, maybe a tea lady, I don't know. So I don't really know what the future holds. I often laugh because when I was at AGS, my 5-year plan was to get in-house. And so then I went to Landers, and that happened within a couple of weeks. And I was like, well, that kind of highlights why I wouldn't put a 5-year plan in place. So, I don't know where I'll be in 10 years' time, but I'll keep you posted.
But it'll be a purpose-driven occupation, whatever it might be with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, on purpose-driven, you're involved with something called the Victorian Women's Trust. I mean, you've got a lot of spare time, I guess, so you can...
Yeah, so I've
three children and General Counsel at Royal Melbourne. What is the Victorian Women's Trust?
Yeah, so I've just joined the board of VWT. So we are an independent feminist organisation that aims to create social change projects and campaigns. We do a lot of research, advocacy, all with the intention of gender equality. The advocacy work focuses on 3 specific areas. One is equal representation, another is economic security, and then there's health and safety. And the whole vision is providing access to everyone equally and to allow, women and gender diverse people the same opportunities as everyone would have. So they're a very small non-for-profit here in Victoria, but this is their 40th year, and they have huge amount of impact.
Who started it?
So this was initially from a grant from the Kane government at the time. It was $1 million grant to create the organisation, and from there it has grown over time. So it is separate from government. It's fully funded itself through donations and philanthropy, but it provides grants to smaller grassroots project because the whole intention is about driving change and tangible change. So you can, see difference in projects. So an amazing organisation, and the current ED, Mary Crooks, has been in the position for 28 years, and it's really remarkable as to how much impact an organisation can have when they're actually very, very small.
And very, very focused.
And very focused, yes.
Well, thank you for coming in this morning and telling us about your life in the law, which is not even half over. So I think we'll reschedule this for 10 and maybe then 20 years' time. Maybe I won't be the interviewer. And because we want to know what's happening in the future with you. You've lived a wonderful life in the law so far, doing great things really and worthwhile things. And I'm sure you'll continue to do worthwhile things, and I'd like to know what they are.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful.
Show notes from today's episode can be found at greenslist.com.au/podcast. There you'll find links to things we've talked about in this episode, a transcript of the show, and some wonderful photos of our guests. If you're enjoying Lives in the Law, please tell your networks, subscribe, rate and review the show. Your host is former lawyer and Greens List clerk Michael Green. Our show is produced and edited by me, Catherine Green, mixed and mastered by Windmill Audio, and recorded by Alex McFarlane, who also wrote and performed all the music for the series. We're coming to you from the iconic Owen Dixon Chambers on the corner of William and Lonsdale Streets in our beautiful city of Melbourne. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respect to their elders past and present. There is no doubt that conversations about justice have been taking place on this land for thousands of years, and we are privileged to continue that discussion here today.